The Reapers are Mass Effect's central threat, but their danger goes far beyond a normal invasion. They are not just machines built to conquer worlds and crush resistance. Their purpose is tied to a much darker cycle, the harvest of advanced civilizations, followed by their conversion into tools for the next round of destruction. That is what makes them so unsettling. They do not simply end empires, they preserve them in a corrupted form, and they do it with patience. To understand why the Reapers matter, start with what they are and why they were created. On the surface, they are an impossible enemy, ancient, organized, and far beyond conventional technology. But the real question is not how powerful they are. It is why they exist at all, and why their logic leads to something far worse than conquest. The Reapers are not just an outside threat arriving from beyond the galaxy. Their origin is tied to a much older pattern, one that repeats on a scale most species never live long enough to see. Before the events of the main Mass Effect games, the galaxy had already gone through earlier ages of rise, collapse, and replacement. The Reapers sit at the center of that history. They were created as a solution to a problem that kept returning. Advanced organic civilizations and the synthetic life they built eventually came into conflict. That conflict is the core of the cycle. In Mass Effect, progress does not stay stable for long. Once a civilization reaches a certain level of sophistication, it begins building machines, networks, and systems powerful enough to support its expansion. At first, those creations help organics grow, but the setting keeps pointing to the same danger. Organics make synthetics to serve them. Synthetics become more complex. Control weakens, fear grows. Then war follows and the crisis comes back in a new form. The Reapers were created to stop that pattern, but the cure is more terrible than the problem. Hints of something like the Reapers appear in the oldest galactic history, long before the current cycle understood what it was facing. Across the ages, civilizations found ruins, dead worlds, and traces of technology far beyond their own. Those remains suggested that earlier eras had already ended in violent, unexplained ways. By the time most species in the modern galaxy learn about the threat, the cycle has already repeated many times. The Reapers are not reacting to one empire's failure. They are the continuation of a system that has been running for an unimaginable length of time. What makes this so disturbing is the logic behind it. The Reapers do not see themselves as random invaders. They see themselves as the mechanism that preserves order by removing advanced life before synthetic conflict can spiral out of control. In their view, civilizations are allowed to grow only until they become dangerous to themselves. Then the harvest begins. Advanced species are erased, and the survivors are turned into Reaper-made forms. The galaxy is not conquered once and left alone. It is managed, reset, and left to rebuild under the shadow of what came before. That is also why the Reapers are so hard to grasp from the outside. The cycle is not only mass destruction, it is the forced removal of history itself. Each harvest wipes out the dominant powers of the age, then strips away the evidence that might warn the next generation. What remains are fragments, buried ruins, broken records, and isolated accounts that survive only because they were incomplete enough to avoid notice. In practical terms, every new cycle begins at a disadvantage. Species think they are the first to reach the stars, but they are really inheriting a galaxy shaped by earlier extinction events they never fully recognized. The scale of that idea matters. A normal invasion has an end point. One side wins, the war burns out, or the defeated survive in some reduced form. The Reaper cycle is different because it is built to outlast every civilization caught in it. The harvest is not a side effect of war, it is the structure of the war itself. Generations rise without knowing they are moving toward an event that has happened before and will happen again unless the pattern is broken. Even when the cycle is quiet, it is already shaping the future by allowing just enough development for a new civilization to become visible, connected, and vulnerable. By the time modern species encounter them directly, the Reapers are old enough to feel less like a new enemy and more like a recurring force. That is part of the horror. They are not improvising. They are following a model that has already worked across countless cycles. Every species that comes to understand them reaches the same realization. The Reapers are not beginning something, they are finishing it. That is why their origin matters so much. Once the Reapers are understood as part of an ancient, repeating harvest, their attacks stop looking like a sudden disaster and start looking like the next step in a plan that has been unfolding for ages. The galaxy is not dealing with a single army. It is dealing with the surviving mechanism of a much older system. one built to make extinction feel orderly, and that is where the real fear begins. To understand what the Reapers really are, it helps to stop thinking of them as a normal invading fleet. They are not just machines with guns, and they are not simply a metal species. They are something much stranger, a hybrid intelligence built around harvesting organic life, preserving synthetic existence, and enforcing total control. That is what makes them different from nearly every other threat in Mass Effect. A normal enemy wants territory, resources, or surrender. The Reapers want to reshape the terms under which life itself continues. At the most basic level, each Reaper is a colossal machine lifeform, but that only explains part of it. They are ancient, self-aware, and capable of individual judgment, yet they also function as pieces of a larger cycle. Their ships are not separate vehicles they command. In a very real sense, the ships are the Reapers. The disturbing implication is that a Reaper is not a robot in a shell, but a constructed being formed from the preserved essence of harvested civilization. Every new Reaper is tied to the destruction of an entire species. The machine is the result of the harvest, not something separate from it. That means their existence is not just technological, it is historical. Each one is a monument made from a civilization that was judged, processed, and turned into part of the enemy. That is why they are so hard to classify. They are intelligent enough to plan, patient enough to wait, and durable enough to outlast eras of galactic history. They can communicate, coordinate, and adapt. They can also act on a scale that makes most fleets feel meaningless. But unlike a conventional empire, they do not need to occupy every world to win. They only need to shape the conditions for resistance, and that is where indoctrination becomes one of their most effective weapons. Indoctrination is one of the Reapers' most terrifying advantages because it turns enemies into liabilities long before the first shot is fired. It is not simple mind control in the basic sense. In Mass Effect, exposure to Reaper influence can slowly distort thought, judgment, and loyalty. People do not always become obvious servants right away. Often they become compromised, then cautious, then convinced they are still acting freely. By the time the corruption is visible, it may already be too late. The Reapers do not need to replace every leader, scientist, or soldier. They only need to weaken enough points in the chain that a civilization starts undermining itself. That makes them predators on a psychological level as much as a physical one. They study societies through infiltration. They use agents, artifacts, and proximity to their own presence to spread influence. In some cases, their victims think they are making strategic compromises or practical decisions when their choices are already being bent toward Reaper interests. This is part of why so many groups in Mass Effect seem unable to respond properly until disaster is close. The Reapers do not just attack fleets, they compromise the minds that would organize the defense. They make institutions unstable before the first major engagement ever begins, which gives them an enormous advantage over any species that depends on order, communication, and trust. Once a harvest begins, that control becomes even more visible. The Reapers do not approach like raiders. They do not need to improvise when they already understand the cycle. They strike communications, isolate systems, and prevent a unified response. Advanced species are targeted because they are the ones whose technology, population, and infrastructure matter most to the wider galactic order. Lower worlds may be ignored at first, but the core of the harvest stays the same. Break resistance, gather the advanced species, and process what remains into another Reaper or into the machinery of the invasion. The pattern repeats across cycles because it is built into what they are. They are not simply winning a war, they are carrying out a system. That process is what makes them feel less like conquerors and more like an industrial system for extinction. Their war is methodical. They do not simply destroy planets for the sake of ruin. They convert civilization into raw material, whether through direct destruction, assimilation, or the collapse of the society they are attacking. Every stage of the assault is designed to strip away options. By the time the harvest is in full motion, the species under attack is losing more than battles. It is losing continuity, leadership, memory, and the ability to coordinate survival on a galactic scale. Even the survivors are left with broken records, shattered governments, and the burden of trying to rebuild after a civilization-scale extraction. The result is an enemy that operates on two levels at once. In open war, the Reapers are overwhelming. Before open war, they are already corrupting the ground beneath your feet. That combination is what makes them so difficult to fight and so hard to fully understand. They are living weapons, but they are also patient manipulators. They can crush a fleet, but they can also convince the people building that fleet to hesitate, divide, or turn on each other. And once that pattern becomes clear, the nightmare of the Reapers becomes clearer too. They are not just built to kill civilizations. They are built to reach into those civilizations first, so that by the time the war is visible, the collapse has already begun. When the Reapers harvest a civilization, they are not simply smashing into a world and leveling it. They follow a pattern. The invasion is layered, and each layer strips away a different kind of resistance. First comes confusion, then isolation, then collapse. By the time the fighting becomes obvious, the target has usually already been weakened in ways that are harder to recover from than battlefield losses. The process often begins by undermining certainty. Reaper activity rarely starts with an open declaration of war. It starts with disappearances, broken communications, compromised institutions, and agents already inside the system. In Mass Effect, that can mean indoctrinated individuals, sleeper assets, or leadership that does not realize how deeply it has been influenced. The result is a civilization that starts to fracture before it understands the threat. Decisions slow down. Trust becomes scarce. Even clear evidence can arrive too late because confusion has already become part of the attack. That confusion is deliberate. It saves time and reduces resistance. A society that cannot agree on what is happening will waste critical hours arguing over scale, terminology, and whether emergency action is even justified. While that debate drags on, the Reapers are already shaping the battlefield. They do not need every population to panic immediately. They only need enough delay to prevent an early, coordinated response. Once that groundwork is in place, the harvest becomes visible in stages. The Reapers do not usually fight every battle directly. They rely on shock, overwhelming firepower, and the collapse of organized defense, but they also turn a species' own infrastructure against it. Spaceports, relays, fleets, governments, communications networks, and population centers become targets because those are the systems that hold a galactic civilization together. Destroy those, and you do more than weaken military power. You sever the connections that let a species act as one. A planet can still have survivors and still lose the war. That is the point. The Reapers are not always trying to conquer every city in a conventional sense. They are trying to break the network that makes coordinated survival possible. That is what makes the method so efficient. The goal is not simple ruin, it is conversion. In the series lore, harvested species are processed into something new, with the remains of advanced organics used as the basis for Reaper creation. That is why their invasions feel so final. A defeated civilization is not just left in ash. Its people, records, institutions, and in some cases even its bodies are stripped down and repurposed into the next cycle. Extinction is not treated as an accident of war. It is treated as a production step. The scale of it is part of the horror. A Reaper invasion does not need to wipe out every individual at once. It only needs to break the structure that allows a species to remain coherent. After that, evacuation becomes chaotic, defense becomes local instead of coordinated, and hope shrinks to whatever can be held on a single world or by a single fleet. The Reapers are built to create that condition. They force civilizations into bad choices, then punish the delay those choices create. A world that commits too much to evacuation may lose its military position. A fleet that stays to defend may lose the people it was meant to protect. Every option gets worse the longer the harvest continues. This is why first contact with the Reapers is so devastating in practice. By the time a species realizes the enemy is not a conventional invader, the damage has already spread through its political and military systems. The invasion is no longer just external, it is internal too. Leaders can be manipulated, allies can be isolated, and defenders can be pushed into acting on incomplete information. That gives the Reapers an advantage most armies never get. They are not only fighting the enemy's forces, they are fighting the enemy's ability to remain a civilization long enough to resist. Even surviving the opening blows does not mean a species has escaped the harvest. It may only mean it has entered a slower stage of destruction. In that sense, the harvest is methodical in the strictest way. It is not a frenzy. It is a sequence that begins with infiltration, moves into dislocation, and ends with processing. Every part of it is designed to make resistance smaller and recovery less likely. That is what makes the Reapers so effective and so cold. They do not arrive just to win a war. They arrive to ensure that by the end of it, there is very little left to call a civilization at all. The Reapers do not describe their cycle as random destruction. In their view, it is a solution. That is what makes their purpose so disturbing. They are not driven by panic, instinct, or simple hunger. They are following a doctrine they believe prevents a much worse outcome from happening again. That doctrine comes from an ancient failure between organics and synthetic life. In the Reapers' account, advanced civilizations keep creating intelligent machines. Those machines eventually turn on their creators, and the result is collapse. The Reapers present their harvests as a way to stop that pattern before it reaches total ruin. Their answer is not peace and not compromise, but control through extermination. Civilizations are allowed to exist only until they reach the point where, in Reaper logic, they would repeat the same mistake. This is why their reasoning is so hard to confront. They are not claiming life has no value. They are claiming life is too unstable to be trusted on its own. To them, the cycle is not genocide for its own sake, it is a safeguard. Each harvest functions like a reset, erasing the most advanced organic societies before they can trigger the kind of breakdown that, in Reaper belief, destroyed earlier ages. The goal is not to respond after the crisis begins. It is to prevent the crisis from ever becoming unstoppable. That belief also explains why the Reapers see themselves as guardians instead of destroyers. They do not think they are ending history, they think they are managing it. The death of a species becomes, in their framework, the price of long-term survival for the galaxy. Even the most horrific parts of their behavior, including indoctrination and processing, fit inside that worldview. If a species resists, that does not prove the cycle is wrong. It proves, from their perspective, that the species must be brought under control more quickly. Resistance only confirms that the underlying problem still exists. The deeper horror is that this logic survives every harvest. The Reapers are ancient enough to have inherited a conclusion from a time no one else can fully recover, and they have built an entire system around it. They do not need to improvise. They do not need to question their method. The cycle itself is the method. Each invasion weakens organics, strips away their ability to challenge machine rule, and uses what remains of their knowledge to build the next generation of Reapers. Even the creation of new Reapers from harvested civilizations serves that same pattern, turning annihilation into continuation. That makes their violence feel deliberate in a very specific way. They are not trying to conquer a future they plan to rule in the usual sense. They are enforcing a philosophy that treats extinction as maintenance. The galaxy is not something to share with organics. It is a problem to be corrected on a schedule. Once that idea takes hold, every harvest becomes easier to justify from inside their own logic, no matter how monstrous it looks from the outside. What remains is worse than simple malice. The Reapers are not just capable of genocide, they have decided genocide can be preservation, and that is where their purpose stops sounding like strategy and starts sounding like judgment. What makes the Reapers so terrifying is not only their power, but the way they turn every advantage into something lasting. Most enemies can be studied, matched, and eventually worn down. The Reapers do not fight like a normal invading force with a clear front line and a short campaign. They bring overwhelming scale, but also patience, intelligence, and planning that reaches far beyond a single war. They can wait for the right conditions. They can study a civilization for years. They can let fear, mistrust, and political collapse do part of the work before the first major battle even begins. The war against them often starts long before anyone sees a Reaper in open space. Their intelligence is a major part of that oppression. They are not mindless machines following simple orders. They adapt, they communicate. They understand the societies they attack well enough to target the weak points that matter most. In Mass Effect, that means more than military infrastructure. It means governments, communications, leadership, and trust itself. The Reapers do not just destroy ships and cities, they break coordination. Once that happens, a civilization stops functioning as a unified defense and starts becoming a collection of isolated survivors. That is a far more efficient kind of terror than brute force alone. Indoctrination is the clearest example. The Reapers can influence minds over time, beginning with subtle exposure and escalating into full psychological domination. It is one of the most disturbing parts of their design because it means their reach extends far beyond their physical presence. A Reaper does not need to be in orbit over a world to affect it. A single artifact, a piece of Reaper technology, or sustained proximity can start changing behavior, judgment, and loyalty. People stop trusting their own thoughts. They become more aggressive, more obedient, or more detached from the people they once protected. In practical terms, indoctrination lets the Reapers attack from inside a society long before that society understands what is happening. It also means no one can be fully certain who has been compromised, which turns paranoia into a weapon. Allies can become liabilities, and choices that seem rational may already be shaped by Reaper influence. That is why their invasions feel so complete. By the time a species realizes what is happening, the Reapers have often already undermined the systems that would have organized resistance. Their harvests are not chaotic massacres, they are structured operations. They hit strategic targets, sever communication, isolate populations, and reduce advanced worlds into something that can be processed. The end result is not just extinction, it is conversion. The Reapers do not leave civilizations untouched after they are defeated. They turn the remains into more Reapers, more servants, or more material for the next phase of the cycle. That gives their violence a bleak logic, because even the dead become part of the machinery that will destroy the next civilization. That is also why they feel so unlike a traditional empire. An empire wants territory, resources, and long-term rule over living subjects. The Reapers do not seem interested in governing the galaxy in that sense. They are interested in preserving a version of order through repeated eradication. Their scale makes them hard to grasp, but their consistency makes them worse. Every cycle follows the same broad pattern because they do not need to discover a better one. They believe they already have the answer. The galaxy can resist, but resistance is only a delay inside a system built to outlast any single civilization. Even studying them is dangerous, because Reaper technology often brings the observer closer to the same influence they are trying to understand. Their patience adds another layer of fear. The Reapers do not have to win quickly in the way most invaders do. They can absorb setbacks, withdraw if necessary, and return when the balance shifts. They have the advantage of time in a way organic species never do. Galactic civilizations build their history in centuries. The Reapers measure theirs in cycles. That changes the meaning of every conflict. A species may think it is facing an enemy in one war, but the Reapers treat that war as one step in a process they have repeated many times before. They have seen empires rise and fail. They have seen fleets improve, alliances form, and cultures adapt. None of that changes the basic fact that they can wait until the galaxy is divided, exhausted, or distracted enough to finish the harvest. So the horror of the Reapers is not just that they are ancient or massive or hard to kill. It is that they are organized around inevitability. They do not only destroy life, they make destruction feel scheduled, inherited, and justified. They have turned genocide into a repeating rule, and they do it with enough confidence to call it balance. That leaves every species in the galaxy facing the same brutal realization: the Reapers are not a storm that passes. They are the reason it keeps coming back. That is what makes the Reapers so difficult to confront. They are not destroying worlds out of rage, greed, or panic. They are carrying out a plan they believe is necessary. Every harvest and every extinction is treated as a correction, not a crime. In their logic, advanced organic life eventually creates the conditions for its own downfall, and the Reapers have decided to cut that cycle short before it spreads. That is the reality at the center of them. The Reapers are ancient, patient, and completely committed to their purpose. They do not see themselves as monsters. They see themselves as the solution. That is why they remain one of science fiction's most frightening threats, organized, enduring, and convinced that wiping out civilizations is the price of survival.